Okay, so we're back and we're going to do chapter six, um, which is the current issues and future trends in the counseling profession. And some of this is a little bit of a repeat from what we talked about in the last chapter. So I'll kind of skip through some of it, so I won't be repeating myself. And we'll go ahead and get started. But think about this as we're going through. Think about it from two mindsets, like a practitioner mindset of like, what does this mean for the clients in front of me tomorrow? And the other mindset of think of it as from the professional identity mindset, like what does this mean for the profession, for our ethics, our standards, and our advocacy, and the kind of counselors we're becoming. So we'll talk about ethical guidance, new challenges, um, that technology and social media bring, that kind of thing, distance counseling. And we'll get into a lot more of this in class with our activities. So let's go ahead and get started. With this slide, we talked about this a lot last chapter about the division and expansion and autonomy of the new divisions and the ASCA national model, which actually just got revised a couple of months ago to a 2025 version. We talked about the 2020 standards in the last chapter as well. And we also went through the credentialing process about the 67,000 NCCs. Um, talked about that, which is National Certified Counselor, which is what you will have to become licensed as a professional counselor. And if you're a school counselor and you get it, you can become a nationally certified school counselor. And in Mississippi, you actually get $6,000 more a year if you have that certification, and 10,000 if you work in certain counties within Mississippi. I know like Marshall County is one of them. Yazoo County is one of them. I think Bolivar, um, maybe Washington County, but it's those really high needs areas. They will give you an additional $4,000. And so, looking at the counseling profession, um, history and trends, starting with like the ethics, because we have to follow the ACA Code of Ethics, and the most recent version we have is 2014. They are working on a new updated version, but right now we have the 2014 code. Also, if you are um, a school counselor, you have the ASCA Code of Ethics. The Marriage and Family Therapy Association has codes of ethics. NBCC has a code of ethics. You know, they have multicultural competencies. So you need to look at ACA first, and then you will go and start moving down into maybe your specialty areas. So, like for me, I would look at ASCA as my specialty area. Um, it lists here some ethical issues faced today by counselors. Of course, this is not all of them, but just some of them. So with values in counseling, clients bring their values and we bring ours. We're human beings. We all have biases. We all have values that we were raised with or that we have adopted. And that's fine. The task isn't to pretend that we have none, but it's to ensure that our personal values don't override client autonomy. So no matter what I think, what my values are, and the person sitting across from me, or the couple sitting across from me, the child sitting across from me, whoever, I need to see them and meet them where they are. I enter into their world with them, and I'm there to help them explore the best path or best solution for whatever they're dealing with. It is not the time for me to try to sway them and to change their mind about something, and to help them adopt what I believe to be true and right and moral and my values. That's not the time, and that's not the goal. That's not the job. This also means that we need to recognize our value conflicts early. So again, we're human. We're going to have the conflicts. So as soon as I recognize that I have one, I need to get supervision and consultation. So if Dr. Hodges is my supervisor, I need to say, well, Dr. Hodges, I'm really struggling with this client I'm seeing. He believes thus and such. And that really goes against my value system. I feel like, he is perpetuating harm to his family and the community with this value and this belief that he has and, all the things. And my feelings are valid. But the place for me to express those feelings is in my consultation and supervision, not in the counseling session with the client. My goal at that point is to help the client enter in their world and to respect their worldview. And so we'll talk a little bit later about, I don't know if it's in this chapter or another chapter, we'll talk about a case where someone tried to refer a person because of a values issue and they lost their job and they lost their court case when they sued because you just can't refer people out because they have a different value system than you. It has to be something super, super serious um, before you chart doing referrals. So that's values in counseling. We'll look at technology in counseling. Uh, Technology can be, good and bad, depending on who you ask. So for technology, it does expand access. It reduces travel barriers. I love seeing my counselor telehealth. I didn't think I would at first, but I love it because it is super easy. I can, log on from the house. I can log on in the morning before class starts. If I'm already in Oxford at COPE or whatever, I've had many a session at COPE at 8 o'clock before I saw my own clients, before I started, class for the day. So it's very accessible, convenient, but it also raises questions about privacy, security, and informed consent, and documentation. So it according to the ethics, if you're licensed in Mississippi, you can't see a person if they're not in the state or in Mississippi. Well, if you are on telehealth, unless you ask or you notice a change in background, how do you know they're in the state of Mississippi? Or if something happens to them, how do you know what address to send? And as you go through the program and you do the telemental health counseling training, you'll learn how to assess for that in the very beginning, like how to ask where they are, that kind of thing. And everybody does their own way. You'll find your groove on how you do that. Social media in counseling is a big thing. There are a lot of therapists and counselors on social media. They have their personal accounts, and then they also have like their business account. And it can humanize us, and it also can disseminate like information. But you have to be careful about what you disclose um, and what you post because it could affect the client relationship. And I think it has to be you look at your ethics and you go through the ethical decision making model and you see your supervisor and you kind of come up with your own plan. Everybody's different. Some people share a little bit more. Some people share a whole lot less. I think it's just what you and your conscience can handle that is in line with the code of ethics. Life-threatening diseases and duty to warn. When there's potential harm to self or others involved, now it is an ethical duty and legal duty. So you have to know your state laws, know your agency, workplace policy on duty to warn and protect, and have a step-by-step plan for risk assessment and consultation, how you're going to document it, and what the referral process will look like. But the main thing to keep in mind is that client safety is first. So, but in order to make the application judgment, but in order to, to make the decision, you also need to have judgment and culture of humility too, which is something we'll talk about a little later as well. Culturally competent counseling and social justice, that is cultural responsiveness and a commitment to equity. So that may mean adapting assessments um, so that it fits the clients in front of you. We talked last chapter about the tests weren't normed on diverse clients, diverse people, just mainstream urban Americans. So think about that. Also addressing systemic barriers and advocating within our roles. So, we're not just counselors in this office, but we're also advocates. And so sometimes a lot of times you're going to have to advocate for your client and the systems that are harming them. If you're committed to their um, growth and development. Distance counseling, telehealth is here to stay. It's telehealth. Yeah, I just said I love it. And so you need to have a really clear and clarified, informed consent for telehealth. It's going to look different than an in-person telehealth, an in-person session and an in-person informed consent. You need to confirm your licensure coverage across locations, like I talked about earlier, make sure they're in the right state, plan for crisis, and ensure confidentiality in both settings. So making sure nobody's in your room listening in, and make sure that they're alone in their room as well. And then lastly, end of life counseling. And so that work requires sensitivity to culture, to faith, to family systems, um, and then to client preferences. So be clear about your scope of practice and what it is that you're doing in this situation as the counselor. Um, Seek supervision and make sure that you are collaborating with the medical team. Um, because at this point, ethical care is going to be about dignity, and honoring the person's wishes, not disrespecting them, and having some informed decision making to support the client. And across all of those, all seven of those, the theme is the same: ethical sensitivity plus like practical procedure. So we use the codes as a compass. We consult when we're unsure, and then we document our reasoning so that we can stand behind our decisions if we're ever questioned by them. And so that is those ethical issues, and we'll move on to client profession, its history and trends. And so the fourth and fifth forces, multiculturalism and social justice, they aren't add-ons to traditional counseling. Like I said earlier, these things are embedded in every course, and they should be embedded in every counseling conversation that you have. And so, because they shape how we see the client, and they shape how we see the systems around the client. Again, the client is not in a bubble; it's existing in a system. And moving on to the multicultural and social justice counseling competencies, um, in plain language, is you do your own work, you do your self work, you look at your identity, your biases, your power, all the things that you're learning about in multicultural counseling this semester, all the things that you'll be doing in there. You learn your clients' worldviews, ask questions, you do your own readings, but ask questions because just because they're part of this group does not mean that they adopt every practice that the group has. So you have to build a culturally responsive relationship and engage in interventions that can include not just interpersonal work, but advocacy and interpersonal, institutional, community, and policy levels, but always in collaboration with the client. Third is evidence-based practices. Um, and this is not just a get the script and follow the model. But it's more of being familiar with the best research-based supported treatments, being in the know about what's best for the latest research-based treatment on eating disorders, and then looking at that and saying, okay, now that I know that, let me combine this with my clinical expertise and my counseling skills and my empathy and my attending skills. And then let me adapt all of this in light of the client's preferences, values, and cultural background. So, evidence-based practice is not just the manual and the guidebook, but you have to combine it with your own clinical expertise and the client's preferences. And that way, you'll best support the client. And for common factors, we talked a lot about working alliance last week in class. Um, you need to be good at delivering a theoretical approach, but if you do not have a good relationship with the client, no matter how good your theoretical approach is, it may not land with them. So definitely make sure you have a good working alliance and have a good understanding of what theoretical approach you're taking with the client in that session and for their problem in their treatment plan. Moving on to, do we have to memorize all those names? Short answer, um, no, not as like an end all be all. The point really is the point of history. It's not, we're not taking a trivia contest. It's really to understand how the past shapes the present so that you can make a smart, informed choice about your future as a counselor. And so, what I tend to do is I keep my eyes on the big arcs, like the movements and the paradigm shifts. So, like I know the Industrial Revolution happened, and I know what that meant because I know what that meant, and I know that people moved from this place to that place in search of jobs. I know that counselors were needed to help people figure out what job fit them best. What skills did they need? What skills did they already have and matched up with the job? So if you know what was happening, you know the big movements, then you can begin to, in the social conditions, you can begin to let them um, guide your timeline, and you'll be able to remember what actually matters, like how to think like a counselor. So the names can feel like a lot. So if you don't remember all the names, it's fine. If you can remember the big ideas and the big movements, it will likely help you to remember the names. But that's the biggest thing, knowing how the past shapes the present, knowing what was going on when these things happened in counseling, when these big movements happened in counseling, and how they influence the movement, how the movement influence counseling, and make meaning of that when you get into the counseling session. So with the multicultural social justice focus, um, we talked earlier about, not just focusing on what's going on in the office, but what's going on around the client. And this slide discusses what programs are doing. So recruiting more students of color, because we know that most counselors are white women today. Especially when you go to the conference, you will see there not a lot of men. Um, of any race, but the most of the room would be white women. And so, because we need diverse perspectives in the field, and also because we want to be able to best serve clients. So sometimes people want to sit across from someone who looks like them. They feel like they may have a closer connection for whatever reason. We want to recruit more students of color to reflect that change. Also, we want to be sure that all students are trained in the multicultural social justice competencies. All students of all races need to be trained in this. Make sure that counselors are advocating for clients and the systems that oppress them. And challenging ourselves to step outside of our comfort zones, because again, we all have values and biases and we have our boxes. And so challenging ourselves to step outside those boxes, and providing vehicles for increased scholarship, especially related to social justice and cross-cultural counseling. So this slide talk about ethics, where we've been. I told you that we were revising them every 10 years or so. And the reason we revise them is because we want to make sure that we're keeping up with the changes that have happened over time. So in 1970, there was no need to talk about telemental health ethics because there was no such thing as telemental health. But now there is. And so the code of ethics has been updated to reflect that. Um, and be aware of your own ethical codes. And so thinking about, a simple decision pathway, and you'll learn all about the ethical decision making model, but you just think about, what is the dilemma? Consult with the code, your job or agency policies, weigh you're going to weigh principles that you'll learn about in ethics, beneficence, autonomy, justice, fidelity, non-malfeasance. Seek
supervision, and then you make your decision and you document why you made the decision. That's basically the ethical decision making model. And so, but you'll learn a lot more about that when you take ethics next term. But being aware of the ethical codes is the main thing because you can't make an informed decision if you don't know the codes. So the counselor in progress, and this is the last slide, I believe, but it's about who we are becoming as counselors and how we use history to guide us. And so, we've seen the profession move from vocational guidance to humanistic approaches, from directive to client-centered care, from single theory allegiance to a more integrative, evidence-based, cultural responsive practice. We've seen all these changes. And so we've learned from the past and that the past shapes the present. And so looking ahead, where are we now? Where are we now? We're in an era that is focused on multicultural social justice competence, evidence-based integration, factors like working alliance and telemental health, technology and counseling, AI and counseling is a big thing now. And we're also in an era that expects us to be clinically skillful and contextually wise. And so the shifts that might be occurring, um, definitely movement towards measurement informed care, and that's like using assessments and so forth. Um, Interdisciplinary collaboration, working in teams. When I worked in community mental health, they had this thing called wraparound service. So it'd be a counselor. There's also a social worker. There's also like a case manager. And then it may be a nurse prac. And then it may be a mentor at the school. So all of us working together in this integrated care team to best support the client. Ethically grounded digital practice. And then also a another shift is a deeper attention to equity and access. And so a charge to you as a counselor in progress, you want to keep a reflective stance and reflective mindset. So, you know, seek supervision, get consultation, and have honest conversations with yourself about your values and your and how you're showing up. Um, Tend to your professional identity for sure. Make sure you know your codes, your standards, get licensed, and always keep up with the latest trends and latest research. Stay client-centered and culture-centered. So you want to make sure align the goals of the session and the treatment plan with the client values and lived experiences and not yours. And then also be future ready. When things change, be ready to adapt. When COVID came, I was working in community mental health, and we had to immediately overnight go into telehealth. And then I started as a school counselor that same year during COVID. And all the training I'd gotten about how to do classroom guidance lessons were going to be different because I couldn't go into every classroom and do the lessons. And so I had to become a content creator overnight and make YouTube videos. And so, and as you can see, I after that whole year, I still haven't gotten better at recording videos. But I did it and it worked. They liked them. It got the job done. So you have to be ready to adapt and be ready to change, because things are going to change continuously. And so that is it for chapter 6. Just some things to do. Make sure that you take the quiz. Make sure that you write your reflection, and also keep in mind that the counselor interview paper is coming up soon. If you haven't found somebody, you're having trouble with that, please reach out to me, Shanier, or Dr. Hodges. Dr. McCormick said last week that there are people over at the University Counseling Center that you can interview. We know people that you make an interview. So if you're having trouble, please ask us so that you can get that done. Not just to check a box and get a grade, but because it really does give you some insight onto what it's like to be a counselor.